Hey everyone. By the way, I am Miss Resume Silaigan, and for this session, we're going to talk about the research framework. So, the research framework is very important because this will serve as your foundation of your research or the structure of your research. So, just like when you build a building, in building a building is you are going to have first the structure so that it will strengthen the foundation of your building. The same with research. It is really important to have this framework or the structure, because without this framework or structure, you cannot assure on what your research paper will look like. So, again, as I've said, a research framework provides a structure or model to support your research study. So, why research framework is important? Because it helps you to determine the appropriate approach and methods that you will apply in your research study. And it also helps you to structure and plan your research activities based on the scope and statement of the problem of your research. So your research framework will serve as the design on what your study will look like. Okay? So there are basic common research frameworks. And these are theoretical framework, conceptual framework, and empirical framework. So these are the common research frameworks. So there are lots of research frameworks, but I'm just only going to introduce the basic one. So a theoretical framework consists of concepts, definitions, and references to related literatures, existing theories that is applied in your study. So you have already your theoretical literature, right? And based on your literature, from that theoretical literature, you already assess the applicability of those theory in answering the main research problem or the main thesis of your research. So you are going to decide that among those theory, what is the most applicable theory that will give a tentative answer of your research. It illustrates an understanding of theories and concepts that are relevant to the topic of your research paper. That is why before you dwell on this theoretical framework, it is really important that you have first to study about the different theories in your theoretical literature. You are going to review a lots of theories. You are going to read those theories and understand if those theories are relevant to your research topic or not. So the selection of a theory should depend on its appropriateness, ease of application, and of course, explanatory power. So the theoretical framework here specify which key variables influence a certain phenomenon, and this certain phenomenon should relate on your research problem. So how to develop a theoretical framework? You just simply test the validity of that existing theory in relation to specific events, issues, or phenomena. So you have to consider these following questions. What is the research problem or question? Because you have to determine your main research problem or question. You have to relate your theory, or you have to assess if that theory will give a tentative answer on that research problem, and also why the selected approach or theory is an applicable solution to answer your research problem. So these are the important questions that you need to consider in developing a theoretical framework. I have here an example about the capital structure theory. So actually this theory refers to a systematic approach to finance activities through a combination of equities and liabilities. So this explores the relationship between the debt financing, equity financing, and market value of the firm or organization. So my study is about the effect of financial stability on the income of local government in Iligan City. So here is the question or the validity test of this theory on this research problem. Thus, a capital structure theory helps explain or apply to the effect of financial stability on the income of local government in Iligan City. You might think that maybe the debt ratio or the debt to equity ratio, which are indicators of your financial stability, may have an effect on the market value or the income of your local government in Iligan City. So, it might be that this capital structure helps to give a tentative answer of your main research problem. So when making a theoretical framework, you have to do the following. So once you already choose a theory, then you have to describe that theory, describe that framework, concepts, models, or specific theories of your study. And you have to position your theoretical framework within a broader context of related concepts, models, or theories. And the present tense is used when writing about your theory. So it's just like you're just talking to the reader on why that theory is applicable in your study. And you have to use the present tense. And you have to make sure that your theoretical assumptions are explicit as much as possible. So the assumptions there should be exposed or should be written. And don't just take what the theory says as a given. So you really have to critique, to assess on why that theory is applicable solution to your research problem. So these are the guide questions for your theoretical framework. So among all theories that you reviewed, especially from your theoretical literature, which theory is the best tentative answer to your main research problem? And why that theory is the most applicable solution? And how the assumptions of that theory explains or answer your main research problem. So you're going to describe the theory. It's not just the assumptions only. You just only state the assumption in the first paragraph, then so be it. It's not like that. You really have to state the assumption. Why did you choose that theory? And how does those assumptions of that theory would explain or answer your main research problem. So let's have this another example. So I have here the sample, another example of a theoretical framework. So this study is about the effect of financial attitude, behavior, and financial literacy to the financial wellness. So this study adopted the model developed by Juice 2008. So it shows that financial wellness is a component of the overall human well-being, along with the other aspects such as mental health well-being and social well-being, emotional and physical well-being as well. A person's financial wellness is comprised of other sub-factors, which includes financial satisfaction, status, financial behavior, attitudes, and knowledge. As you can see on this figure, on this model, the financial attitude, knowledge, under the subjective perceptions are all connected to the financial wellness. So meaning it has a direct effect on the financial wellness. The same with the income as part of your status or the socioeconomic profile status. And also financial behavior have direct effect on financial wellness. So maybe in assessing the effect of the financial literacy behavior and attitude on financial wellness. So now let's proceed with the conceptual framework. So when we say conceptual framework, this maps out the actions required for investigating a research study. So given the previous knowledge of other researchers' point of view and observations. Here, in your conceptual framework, you are going to assess again your journal studies, and among those journal studies or existing researches, what will be your basis? You have to choose one journal studies that the concept of this existing study may be applied to your research paper. So this represents how particular variables in your study connect with each other. So how to develop a conceptual framework? So there is no actually prescribed format on what the conceptual framework looks like. But the important thing of a conceptual framework is that it will show you the potential outcome of your study. From that framework, it can identify that it can illustrate what your study is all about. So the conceptual framework of your research only depends on your topic, or even in your main thesis, or your problem or research problem of your study. So the following are the things that you need to consider in doing a conceptual framework, of course. You have to decide on what will be your research topic, and you have to do literature reviews, especially with the research journals or the existing researches. Then determine the important variables needed by your research topic, or the variables that are connected to your research topic, and use those variables that connects the potential outcome of your study. So here, in developing a conceptual framework, it is really necessary to identify what variables are you going to use in your study. So that is why you really have to read your existing researches or the existing journal studies from other researchers, so that you may get an idea about the variables that you are going to apply in your study. I have here the example of my conceptual framework, and the research topic is about the effects of financial stability on the income of the local government in Iligan City from year 1980 to 2018. So here is my conceptual framework. So I have here my independent variables and my dependent variables. This is simple because I just only want to assess the effect of financial stability, which are indicated by the debt ratio, equity ratio, debt to equity ratio, and time interest earned. So these are the indicators of my financial stability. And this is my dependent variable, which is the income of the local government unit of Iligan City. So it's just like that, these independent variables and as indicators of financial stability have a direct effect on the dependent variables. So this is what conceptual framework looks like. But again, there is no prescribed format on your conceptual framework. So these are the guide questions in making a conceptual framework. So first is, what are the basis of your conceptual framework? So you have to assess again your theory and also the related journal study that you have chosen. Another is, what is your conceptual framework all about? So you are going to discuss about this conceptual framework. So you are going to say here that under the independent variables are the debt ratio, equity ratio, debt to equity ratio, time interest earned, which these variables are the indicators of your financial stability. So that is how you are going to describe your conceptual framework. And this figure shows that these variables have direct effect to the income of local government unit of Iligan City. That is why this is my conceptual framework looks like. So another is, aside from what is your conceptual framework all about, so you are going to discuss the whole framework, you are going to describe the whole framework, and next you are going to answer how the independent variables are related to your dependent variables. So see, there is a relationship between my independent variables and my dependent variable. You can also include other types of variable. So, how the relationship of the variables connects to the potential outcome of your study on your main thesis. So, you are going to connect or to relate the relationship, for example, of these variables to the final outcome or the potential outcome of your study. So you're going again to write a descriptive format of your conceptual framework by answering these guide questions. So after the conceptual framework, we have here the empirical framework. So your empirical framework illustrates the map or the blueprint in testing a hypothesis using an empirical evidence. When we say empirical, it means application. Application of those theory and concept. So that is what empirical means. So this can be expressed in a mathematical equation or a certain model or a certain illustration. It depends on how you are going to illustrate the map or the blueprint in testing your hypothesis. So this can be expressed in a mathematical equation considering the variables that are used in your research study to answer a research problem. So how to develop an empirical framework? So you have to consider your main thesis or the research problem and also your hypothesis as well as the variables to be used in your research study. So you have to consider all of this. And what is hypothesis? So your hypothesis serves as the proposed explanation to answer the specific problem or the main thesis of your research study. So at the end of your paper, you are going to prove the theory or you are going to apply the concept of your theory or your conceptual framework into an action, no, using the hypothesis testing. So from the hypothesis testing, you're going to gather data and analyze data. So actually your hypothesis already gives the proposed explanation. So here in the hypothesis, this can be null or alternative hypothesis. So when we say null hypothesis, this states that there is no relationship between two phenomenon or variables in the study. So your null hypothesis usually tested at 5% level of significance, because it can be also be adjusted, especially when you do the analysis of your equation. So another is we have the alternative hypothesis, which states that there is a relationship between two selected variables in a study. So I have here an example of null hypothesis. So example, my research topic is about effects of financial stability on the income of the local government unit in Iligan City. So my hypothesis there, as indicators of financial stability, I have debt ratio, equity ratio, and debt to equity ratio, and time interest earned. These are my indicators of financial stability. So it shows that these variables have no significant effect on income of the local government in Iligan City. So here, on the null hypothesis, I'm going to prove if this null hypothesis is true or false. If it is true, then I will not reject the null hypothesis. So if it is true, if my null hypothesis is true, then I will conclude in my conclusion that I will not reject the null hypothesis because your findings might prove that this null hypothesis is true. But if my null hypothesis is false, then I will reject the null hypothesis. So that means that the variables, the independent variables, have significant effect or relationship to my dependent variable. Then, alternative hypothesis. This is the opposite of your null hypothesis. So, for example, I have my topic, which is the effects of financial stability on the income of the local government in Iligan City. So, here I'm going to say that the debt ratio has significant effect on income, equity ratio has significant effect on income, and so forth. So, it shows that the two phenomena have significant relationship with each other. So again, the same with the null hypothesis, I'm going to prove if this alternative hypothesis is true or not. If it is true, then I'm going to accept this hypothesis. So this is my example of empirical framework, which is based on the hypothesis. So here, this is my model. So where I, which is my dependent variable, refers to the income, the beta sub 0 here is my constant, the beta sub 1 here, or the beta sub number, pertains to the slope coefficient associated on each independent variables, which are the debt ratio, equity ratio, debt to equity ratio, and time interest earned. And I have here the mu, which pertains to the error term, because your empirical model is not 100%, right? So there is always a discrepancy of your empirical model. So that is why I have this error term. So this is how your empirical framework looks like. And in your empirical framework, you are going to explain briefly or discuss briefly about this model. So, for example, the empirical model shows that the indicators of financial stability, which are the debt ratio, equity ratio, and time interest, and so forth, has direct and positive effect on the income of the local government in Iligan City, except on the debt ratio, as it believed to have negative effect on the income. So that is how you briefly discuss your empirical model, and it depends on your equation. As you can see here, it is only that the debt ratio has only the negative effect on the income. So that is my hypothesis also. That is what I want also to prove in my further data analysis, after I will gather the data and I will analyze the data. So this is my basis in applying those theory and concepts into action or into this empirical model. So that is why this is very important. You have this empirical framework, especially if you are going to engage in statistical analysis. So that is. So this ends our discussion about the research framework, and I hope that you learned something about the theoretical framework, conceptual framework, and empirical framework. And I hope that you are going to apply those important guidelines on how to create those framework. So again, thank you for your listening, and once again, have a nice day.